Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Kyle Mox. I'm Associate Dean and Director of the Lorraine W. Frank Office of National Scholarships Advisement. And today we are going to be discussing strategies for cultivating effective references for your Fulbright application. Recommendation letters or references are one of the most important parts of any fellowship application, and Fulbright is no exception. For those of you that are just getting started in Fulbright, we've covered this material elsewhere, of course, but this is one of the largest and oldest international exchange programs in existence. It's been around since the end of World War II. It is sponsored by the U.S. Department of State, and it is organized and administered through the Bureau of Cultural and Educational Affairs. So this is a U.S. federal program, which is why it is open only to U.S. citizens. Most grants are between 9 and 12 months in length. Most are the 9 and 10-month range in academic year. It is a very large program with over 2,000 grants given each year to U.S. applicants. And in terms of projects, you can do a study project, research, do something in the creative or performing arts, or even pursue an opportunity to be a teacher in an English language classroom abroad. And again, there's over 140 countries to choose, again, the largest and broadest and probably most inclusive international exchange program around. It does provide full funding for travels, housing, support, any conceivable costs that you would have while you're gone. Fulbright promises that you will live a comfortable student lifestyle while abroad. So while you may not get rich from it, you certainly will not suffer. The one thing to keep in mind as you approach a Fulbright application is that its central goal is to promote mutual understanding through cultural exchange. I bring this up in the beginning, I bring it up in the middle, I bring it up in the end, and I think it's important to keep in mind as you're drafting your application, but also as you think about your references. Can they provide evidence to support the claim that you would be good at this mission, right? That your values and your personal characteristics and abilities speak to this. In terms of timeline, we are fairly early in the process. The application opened around April 1, and we are in the working phase of the cycle. So our campus deadline is September 12. So between now and then, you should be working on drafts of your materials, particularly the essays, which you'll be sharing with us and attending workshops, basically drafting over the entire summer, we hope. Now, the one thing to keep in mind, as I mentioned at the outset, there are two main types of awards, and there's some subdivisions there, but your two main types of awards are the English Teaching Assistant Awards or the Study Research Awards. Now, any of the flavors of study research will require 3 letters of reference, whereas the ETA application requires references, but they're reference forms. So a slight difference there. We'll unpack that a bit more in a moment. Everything is uploaded directly to your application. So there's no pass-through. They don't need to be sent to us. They should not be sent to you for upload because you will input your references information into your online application and they'll upload it directly there. They should remain confidential. That's the best way to get a good letter when people know that the only audience for this letter is the selection committee. And if you have any specific questions or looking for specific guidance under the applicants tab on the Fulbright site, they do talk a bit more in the application components about what expectations are for these letters, but we'll unpack that in our discussion here today as well. The one thing to keep in mind is that references or recommendations are not just a checkbox in an application. They are crucial to a strong application, and I would argue that they are as important as the rest of the application. Because they are going to extend your application. They're going to say things about you that you cannot say about yourself. They're going to offer expert, objective viewpoint on your knowledge, skills, and abilities, things that you could not reasonably claim. And so I think a lot of applicants see it as, oh, okay, I need 3 references, check, 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 as opposed to thinking, how can I cultivate strong references? How can I cultivate references that will actually empower my application rather than just meet the minimum standard? So that's really important to think about, not just in terms of whom you select, but how you work with them to draft a good letter for you. The other thing to think about as you're considering whom would be the best person to ask, there's not a clearly defined list of criteria for an ideal Fulbrighter. But if you think about the nature of the program and the experiences, here are some characteristics that we think should apply to every Fulbrighter. First and foremost, flexibility and adaptability. There is so much that goes as not planned when you are working and studying abroad. So they need to know that you're flexible and adaptable, open to new situations. You're not somebody who's rigid or who panics when the plan doesn't go as written. Obviously, because it's a cultural exchange program, they want you to be open-minded. They want you to have some sensitivity to other cultures. Because I think that's probably one of the most fundamental characteristics if you're going to go abroad as an ambassador. Uh, Initiative, leadership ability, of course, because you are acting independently. You're not going as part of a group of other ASU students going on a study abroad. You're going on your own. And so those leadership characteristics are important, that you exhibit humility, that you're able to go forth and ask questions, you're resourceful, you can put a plan into action. You're not going to sit back and wait for somebody to come help you. Curiosity, I think, is a great characteristic to have anyway, but particularly for Fulbright, that you need to be curious and ask good questions, particularly about your host country culture, and particularly if you're working on projects. And self-awareness and confidence, I think, is important. Again, this is a difficult, challenging experience. You know, they want to know that you can handle it. And I would hazard to say a sense of humor is pretty important because, you know, there's two ways you can respond to stress, and that's laughing or crying. And you know, there's a lot less cleaning up to do after laughter. So that's Kurt Vonnegut. But you can think about how far having a good sense of humor can get you when you are facing these kinds of difficult situations or uncertainties, meeting new people, or just being a good ambassador. So if you aren't a funny person, now's a good time to start. As I mentioned at the outset, the ETA applications will require a reference form. And once you are into our Fulbright Canvas, we have easy access to examples of those that you can see, which I think are helpful as you're deciding whom to ask. You can also find these on the main Fulbright site, the US student site. But just know, this is what's in those little boxes. They want to know about your ability to overcome challenges. If you have knowledge, skills, and abilities that are associated with teaching or mentoring, they'd like to know about your social skills, your ability to work in unstructured environments, and if they think you'd be a good representative of the US. And as I mentioned previously, maturity, adaptability, flexibility, and any other kind of relevant experience. So as you're thinking about the people whom you'll ask, you know, you should look at the boxes, look at the forms and say, can they provide substantive answers to each of these questions? In the past, I've seen forms where the applicant said, I have no basis, or the referee said, I have no basis to evaluate, which again is not ideal. For all of the study research options, which would include graduate degree awards, creative performing arts, independent research, these are 1 to 2 page letters. 2 pages is the max. And we would hope that these letters are going to discuss your ability to execute the project, which seems pretty obvious, but it is worth mentioning that these are not generic letters of support. Many times applicants will get letters from people that have written for them in the past, and that well-meaning but perhaps overburdened referee will just simply recycle the generic letter that they've written. That is not ideal for Fulbright. We would like them to specifically comment on what you're proposing to do with the Fulbright. They'd like these letters to talk about your preparation, both intellectual and professional. And again, thinking about that cultural exchange aspect, if they think you'd be a good representative of the US based on your glittering personality. If there's somebody in your discipline, particularly if you're doing a research proposal, we would think that at least one of these references would be a mentor of some kind to you who works in the same discipline that you do. It would be helpful if they could also put your work in context. The readers are not going to be in the same field that you are. They're going to be familiar with the host country, but they may not work in the same academic area that you do. And so it would be helpful then if one of their colleagues, another academic professional, could help them understand what the relevance of your work is. These will be uploaded directly to the online system. I think they can upload them either as a scanned PDF or just put the text right in there. But I believe it's still upload because I do want these for the most part on letterhead. But those details are very clear in the system. Now, as you're scrambling and thinking, whom should I ask? You know, one of the resources that we do provide you is a recommender matrix in our Canvas. So once you're to the ready to write phase, you should have access to that and be thinking, who are all my options? So we'd want to think divergently and list as many options as possible. And again, we have a spreadsheet that you can use to evaluate your different options. But in a perfect world, there should be somebody that knows you very well. So not somebody who just took one online class with or a very large lecture class, but somebody who's had the opportunity to get to know you, either through small classes or repeated classes or supervising you on a project, or maybe you made good use of office hours, or you've just fostered that relationship outside of the classroom, or workplace or volunteer experience, right? They need to be relevant to this context. So if you're proposing a project that is studying didgeridoo performance in Australia and you get a letter from your calculus professor, they may not be relevant to the context. They have information to share that is useful to the readers. Think about it as data, and they are credible, right? And so we'll talk a little bit about, whom this audience would consider to be credible. Now, the best choices, that's a minimum standard, but the best choices are ones that will actually go that extra mile to provide concrete details and examples. They've got narratives to share. They can provide examples to illustrate their broad claims. They will take the time to write with enthusiasm and interest. Many of my faculty colleagues, I know when they have a student that they feel strongly about, they will put the time in and they will spend 2 to 3 hours working on a strong letter. They don't do that for every student, right? They do that for the students that they feel deserve it. They have other versions of boilerplate that they'll use for the students that are more generic, right? That's not a bad thing. It's just, there are different levels of commitment from different faculty to different students. And so you want to be sure that you've developed good mentors and you have become a good mentee. Ideally, these letters or references would also speak directly to Fulbright, mention Fulbright, talk about Fulbright, talk about the context of the fellowship, particularly if they've done one themselves or they're familiar with the program. Now, two broad categories of references would be academic versus non-academic. And a common question we get is, how many academic references do I need? And the answer is, as with almost every question to do with Fulbright, it depends. It depends on the nature of your project. So if you are proposing to do a highly complex, high-level, very discipline-focused research project, say, using particular scientific methods or theoretical methods or things like that, you should get 3 academic references, people that can talk to your ability to do this very technical project. If it's more service-oriented, and again, you'd want to drift more that way. If you're proposing to do a graduate degree, of course, they would like to know about your potential for success in graduate school, so they would prefer that the majority of the letters be academic references. Now, to the other end of the spectrum, for ETA, because this is more of an applied experience, they actually do specify that they would prefer at least one of the letters not be a faculty member. So 2 faculty members and then 1 person from a volunteer experience or work or something like that would be great in any combination. So this is definitely a conversation to have with one of the ONCE advisors. Once they get to know what your project is, once we've looked at the country summary and really thought through things, we'll help you figure out what a good combination is. So as you're thinking about academic references, these should be university level faculty members, ideally tenure track if possible. If they've recently taught you or supervised your research, so if you're a 4th year student, may not be a great idea to get somebody from your 1st year if you've not talked to them since. Ideally, they are in a discipline relevant to whatever it is you are proposing to do, or your background, or the work in general. So again, as I mentioned, if you want to do something in arts, don't get something from math. Conversely, don't get a letter from your dance instructor if you are proposing to do work in government relations and policy. The higher ranks are preferred, and again, because your audience are professional academics. These are higher ed administrators and mostly faculty. They understand what it takes to get to the level of the different titles. And it takes a lot of work and expertise. They've done excellent research. Now, Fulbright's not as snooty as some other fellowships. They are perfectly fine with letters from our non-tenure track faculty, which at ASU would be teaching professors, but they would give less credibility to graduate students or postdocs or part-time faculty. But again, it depends on the situation. We would always rather go with a lower ranked person who is willing to go the extra mile than we would like to get a letter from a high ranking faculty member who couldn't be bothered to go into great detail about you because they just don't know you that well. So again, good conversation to have with us. Now, it's a little more difficult to generalize about non-academic references, but they should have some professional standing, right? Your shift manager at Krispy Kreme Donuts may not have that much professional standing with this particular audience. the chances are good that this person has probably never written a recommendation letter like this, which would hamper their ability to write this well. So again, conversation they have. I've seen some great letters from managers at work and things like that, but ideally we'd, want to get somebody that supervised your internship in a government office or an undergraduate research experience or in a professional workplace or something like that. They have supervised you. So letters from peers are not desirable. Faculty advisors, even if you didn't have them in class, maybe you've got a faculty advisor for one of your student orgs or something like that. And as I mentioned before, at least one of the ET references need to be non-academic. Do not ask a high school teacher, thinking about where, you're in the youngest applicant for Fulbright would be somebody who's about to receive their bachelor's degree. If you're going back to high school to cultivate references, then you haven't done enough in college. Now, the exception would be is if you've maintained a relationship with that teacher, if you're still doing work with them. I have seen some good references from high school teachers where that applicant had gone back and guest taught the class or had helped work with them on a project or something like that. But if you're dusting off 4 or 5-year-old references, we need to talk about other strategies. Don't ask a peer. Again, because somebody at your own level, meaning a fellow student or about to be student or young professional or anything like that, does not have that objectivity, and they won't have credibility with this audience. Conversely, or similarly, obviously don't get one from a relative or a parent. It wasn't even worth a bullet point to put that up there, but I have received letters from parents, and we've quickly commended that they not use those. And obviously, you wouldn't write a letter yourself, but it is not uncommon for people who are very busy to ask applicants to, well, go ahead and draft a letter and then I'll sign it. Now, you've got to use some sensitivity here and awareness to figure out, does this mean they would like for you to bullet point some things or to write an outline of what might be a good letter? Or are they asking you to really just draft this letter and they'll just stamp it? If it's the latter, I would really recommend that you not do that. Because again, if you could write a sufficient letter about yourself, they wouldn't ask for these references at all. You do not have the experience, you don't have the expertise, you don't have the wide view that somebody worthy of writing a letter would have, and chances are you've never written one of these yourself, whereas faculty members have. Again, you can mitigate and reduce the likelihood that this will happen by being a good mentee, working on an appropriate timeline, and we've got strategies for dealing with this when the situation arises, because it does arise even with people who are great mentors to you, where they're just too busy or that's their practice. Now, I've talked to faculty who routinely do this, and because again, it's not ethical for one, and two, it's just not good practice. And they've clarified to say, well, no, I'm not asking them to write the letter. I would just like for them to give me a rough outline so I can be sure that I'm speaking to the criteria, or that I'm sure that I include an example of their work that I might have forgotten. Now, that's an entirely different thing, and I think that's good practice. As mentioned, credibility is incredibly important here, right? And it comes from a number of different ways. They should be relevant to what you're talking about, and they should be somebody that's timely, meaning somebody that you've worked with recently. Now, when it comes time to make the ask, as I call it, you need to think about timing. Do this well in advance. That can mean different things in different contexts. In the context of Fulbright, I certainly wouldn't ask them any later than 3 weeks before the deadline. I like to say 4 to 6. But what I actually recommend for something like this, and also for grad school and law school and anything else that's kind of substantial like this, is a 2-step approach where very early on, like nowish, would simply get the verbal commitment to say, hey, Dr. Smith, really enjoyed the class this semester. Hope you have a great summer. I just want to let you know that I'm going to be applying for Fulbright later in September, and I was hoping that you feel you could write me a strong letter of recommendation. And they say, yeah, I'd be happy to do that. Great, wonderful. I'll follow up at this date. And you're not asking for the whole thing right there, because it can be overwhelming. And as a faculty member myself, I feel a little overwhelmed when I'm juggling all these deadlines, and a student emails me out of the blue, and there's 6 attachments with their resume and personal statement, all these other things, and they're giving me a date, and I don't trust myself to remember. So I much prefer it when we sort of ramp it up and say, that's great. Hey, I would love to talk to you more about this. Let's schedule a meeting in a couple of weeks. And then once things settle down, we can talk about, the project. Great. At some stage in the process, you should give them what I call the packet. And this would be a copy of your resume, maybe transcripts if it would be useful. Do you think drafts of any essays that you're working on, be that statement of grant purpose or personal statement. If you did any work for them or have any writing samples you'd like to share with them, maybe you want to share with them the essay that they gave you an A- on, and just so they can remember a bit more about your thinking. And I've seen some wonderful letters that make some direct references to work that the students have done. So that can be handy. I've helped students do this through a digital portfolio. If you want to go really organized and super professional, or maybe just a Google Docs folder or something like that, or just, simple attachments in an email is fine. But at some point in that process, you want to give them material to write a good letter. Included in that packet should also be, for Fulbright, a copy of the country summary or the program summary, so they know specifically, what are they looking for here. There is guidance available for faculty on the Fulbright site. And as well, I'll remind you in a moment, we also have a memorandum of guidance that we have written that you should give to the people writing your references. Do not think you are being a pest by nagging or by reminding them of due dates. Myself, I love them. I appreciate them. I tell people who ask me for letters, hey, if you haven't heard from me, if we haven't talked, make sure you remind me at 6 weeks out and 4 weeks out and 2 weeks out. It is appreciated as long as you are being professional and cordial in your correspondence. I've had numerous horror stories from faculty members, mostly on social media, who are complaining about students who show up a week before the deadline and are very pushy and demanding about a letter, as if they're owed a letter. You're not going to get a great letter that way, right? You don't have to be groveling, but if you're on point, professional, timely, and succinct, faculty members will really appreciate that. I do think it's important how you phrase the question too. Many people would just simply pop up and say, hey, do you think you could write me a letter of recommendation? And I'm not generally a fan of just digital questions where it's yes or no, right? Because a faculty member said, yeah, I could write you a letter. We want them to feel that they're not being cornered, because most faculty members particularly are people pleasers. They want to help students, and they don't like to say no to students whenever possible. And many of you might be laughing because you're like, well, my experience shows otherwise. But so there might be somebody who's not entirely comfortable writing this letter because they don't feel they know you, and you're like, hey, can you write me a letter of reference? And they're like, yeah. Instead, I think it's worth having a conversation, and maybe a Zoom call, maybe an in-person meeting, but something a little bit more nuanced where you say, do you feel that you could write me a strong letter of reference for Fulbright? So we're actually naming the opportunity to which we're applying, and you're asking them, can you write me a strong letter? Because this isn't a checkbox. I need a strong letter. And I think it's useful to also add, I wanted to ask you because I think you could talk a lot about blank. This is helpful in a couple of ways because it gives them an assignment. And it can be overwhelming sometimes to think, oh, I've got to write all of this about the student. So they're summarizing their resume and summarizing their CV. And it's easy to forget that all of this material does appear elsewhere in the application. And in reality, the best letters are ones that zero in on one specific facet that's not discussed elsewhere. So you could say, I think you could talk a lot about my research ability in the lab, or I think you could talk a lot about my leadership in the classroom, or you could talk a lot about my service on campus, or you could talk about the work I did with student government. Helps them zero in and helps them understand what their task is in this overall package. Do communicate frequently. I said, you're not being a pest. You're being a good assistant here at this point. You're being a good mentee. Share your materials and process. Even if they don't have time to look at them, they can't say that they didn't know, right? So, hey, here's the third draft of my statement of grant purpose. Oh, hey, I just got through another draft review with ANSA. Here's my latest personal statement. If they're a close mentor, somebody you've worked with, somebody that's actually helping you a little bit on the application, get feedback from them, particularly on the statement of grant purpose. Study research applicants should be getting input from somebody in your field. Here at ANSA, we're pretty smart about the audience. We're pretty smart about the context, but we're not the experts in the topic about what you're writing. So do whatever you can to make it easy for them. Be as helpful as possible. And do show gratitude, whether that is in the form of a note, a simple thank you, small gifts. If you've ever been to my office and just about any advisor's office, you'll notice that there's probably on display somewhere a vast collection of thank you notes. And to me, that is my wall of fame. If you've been up and down the halls of Honors Hall, that I love getting those thank you notes because it shows a student has taken the time out of their life to sit down and really think about the whole process and recognize the fact that, yeah, we did put some effort into this. I do have some skin in this particular game. And small gifts are also wonderful as well. I get really touched when a student just gives me a $5 Starbucks card because I know, $5 is, a meal for an undergraduate student. And they've basically taken a meal out of their budget so I can get some coffee or, give the gift card to one of my kids. But it doesn't have to be a grand gesture. Just something thoughtful is really nice. And do keep them in the loop. I'm often surprised how applicants, faculty members will reach out to me and say, hey, whatever happened to Jane's application? And I'm surprised that they didn't share with them that they progressed or didn't progress or let them know about next steps. I always want to know where my students are going next. I want to know, hey, what's the rest of this story? So don't think again, you're being a pest by sending them emails and just letting them know where you are in life. As mentioned, you should give our memorandum of guidance to your faculty members in that packet when you're ready to get into this seriously, closer to the deadline. It'll be a great way for them to understand the context, introduce them to us, and let them know of the campus deadline first and foremost, but also what resources are available. There are pages devoted to guidance for references on the Fulbright site. So once you go through the application components that they list, they actually have links out to pages that you can share with your faculty members. These pages, the links to these pages are also shared once you trigger the online application request, but you can't tell them enough. And you can send them to us. I have faculty members every year that reach out and say, hey, Dr. Marks, would you have the time to take a look at my reference? I really want to go to bat for this student. I really want to support their application. Am I doing this the right way? Do you have any suggestions? And I am very happy to do that because again, these references are one of the most important aspects of your application, and the stronger we can make them, the stronger we make your application. So I don't know where you are in the process right now, and I don't know if you're watching this where you are, but if you're just getting started, your first step is to schedule an intake meeting. Once you do that, once you go to schedule an intake meeting, you'll pick one of 3 shoots. We have intake meetings for people applying for research and arts proposals. We have appointments for people that want to do a graduate degree through Fulbright, and we have the ETA intake appointments as well. And then from there, we'll move you through the process. We'll get you ready to write. We'll get you draft review, and hopefully all the way to September 12th. You can schedule appointments through our website once you're ready to do that. There's also a link to our YouTube page where you probably found this video, or you'd like to view some of our other Fulbright videos. You can get on our Slack channel there as well, which is a great way to ask questions in real time and get answers from us right away. The Fulbright site itself, fulbright.asu.edu, has information on our timeline, some FAQ, and of course, getting started videos. And then when you need to do research on the projects themselves, or programs themselves and the countries and statistics and all this other stuff, that's at the main Fulbright site, us.fulbrightonline.org. So thank you for your time and attention. We look forward to learning more about your proposals, learning more about your ideas. And again, when you're ready to ask questions about how to approach people for better letters, we are here and waiting. So thank you so much.